right, today we're gonna learn how to dye pulp. So what I have is I just have an empty bucket that's bigger than what I'm gonna need. And I've got a yogurt container of pulp that I'm gonna go ahead and dump in that bucket. So essentially whatever pulp you wanna dye, you're just gonna dump it in a bucket that's bigger than what you need. And then this pulp today is cotton, which is really takes color really well, and it's nice and white, so it's gonna take color great. The other thing about this pulp is when I made it in the beater, I added something called retention agent to it already. And so before you guys go to add dye to any of the pulps in the classroom, make sure and read the labels to see if it has retention agent in it or not. So you should only add dye to pulp that has retention agent. The dye itself won't stick to paper unless that additive is already in. And we add it in the beating stage because then it has time to really mix in and attach to all the different fibers. So my pulp's ready to go. And then I have these dyes. And so, you know, these are really, really, really concentrated colors. And you wanna be really careful with these because this can get messy really fast. These will stain your clothes, they will stain everything they touch. And the amount of dye that you use is actually really, really small. So for example, if I was coloring an entire 5-gallon bucket, I would only use like 2 tablespoons of this dye. So since we're only using like a fraction of the size of one of those buckets, it's gonna be a really small amount of dye. So in my hand right now, I have 1/4 of a teaspoon, and that's still too much colorant. So I'm just gonna take like a little tiny bit, almost just like touching the spoon to the dye, and then I'm gonna mix that with some water and see if I like that color. I know I want it just a hair darker, so I'm gonna add just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit more. So that's this yellow number 42 that I've added in, but I'm going for a little bit earthier of a yellow. So I'm gonna take my measuring spoon, I'm gonna rinse it off in some water because I don't wanna contaminate my 2 dyes. And then I'm just gonna take a tiny little bit of this brown, and I'm literally just dipping the tip of this in, and I'm gonna mix that in as well. So there we have it. It's just dye mixed in with water. And the reason why you add it to water is so that it will disperse better. It'll mix better with your dyes. So then I take this water with the dye, I dump it in my bucket, and then I just use a spoon to stir it up. And then from there, I can adjust the color. Like if this is the color I want, then great, I'm done. If it seems a little bit pale to me, I can add a little bit more water and a little bit more dye. But one of the things you want to watch out for is if the water inside this bucket runs colored, that means you've added too much dye. It means it's not sticking to the fibers, and so watch out for that. So what I ended up with is just like a really lightly tinted earthy yellow, which is what I was going for. So I'm gonna call this done. In a dream world, it's a good idea to let your dyes sit overnight. They just have more of a chance to absorb and become more saturated. And so this dye that I just mixed up right now, this will sit until tomorrow, and then I will be able to make paper with it. Rinse everything off, and be especially careful when you put the lids back on the containers. You don't want any crusty dye to get on the rims or the screws, or else the next person that touches it ends up with dye all over their hands, all over the tables. It gets messy really fast. So make sure when you're done with the dyes to take a paper towel and wipe them off so you leave them clean for the next person. And that's how to color your pulp.